No one at the border checkpoint expected anything unusual that morning. The sun was barely above the horizon, casting long shadows across the concrete barriers as cars moved forward one by one. Officers followed the same routine they had performed hundreds of times before. Check documents, ask a few questions, wave the vehicle through. Most people were nervous. Some were impatient. Nothing ever surprised them anymore. Until this man arrived. He stepped out of the vehicle calmly, adjusting his jacket as if he had all the time in the world. No raised voice. No hesitation. No fear. That alone caught the officer's attention. People who had nothing to hide were usually relaxed, but this level of calm felt different. Almost calculated. One officer glanced at his partner and subtly nodded. "Sir, please wait here," the officer said, keeping his tone professional but firm. The man nodded without protest. Behind him, traffic slowed. Radios crackled. A few officers shifted their positions, hands resting near their belts, not out of aggression, but instinct. Something about this stop felt off. Experience told them to trust that feeling. They began asking standard questions. "Where are you coming from? Where are you headed?" The man answered clearly, confidently, never once breaking eye contact. His voice was steady, his posture relaxed. It was as if he already knew how this conversation would end. That made one officer uneasy. Most people explained too much. Others explained too little. This man explained just enough. A document was taken, then another. The officer turned and walked back toward the checkpoint desk to run a routine verification. Nothing dramatic, just protocol. But as the seconds passed, the atmosphere began to change. The officer stared at the screen longer than expected. His expression tightened. He refreshed the system. Once more, another officer leaned over. Then another. Quiet whispers replaced casual chatter. The sound of passing vehicles seemed to fade into the background as attention shifted to a single name on the screen. Back at the checkpoint, the man waited silently, hands relaxed at his sides. He didn't check his watch. He didn't look around. He didn't ask questions. It was almost as if he knew whatever they had just found was about to change everything. And this routine stop was no longer routine at all. The officer didn't return right away. At first, no one noticed. A few extra seconds at a checkpoint meant nothing. But as time stretched on, the silence became heavy, unnatural. Radios stopped crackling. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every officer in the booth was now focused on the same screen, reading and rereading the same lines as if hoping they had misunderstood. One of them finally broke the quiet. "Run it again." The keyboard clicked. The system refreshed. The result didn't change. The name remained highlighted. Across the checkpoint, the man stood exactly where he had been told. He hadn't shifted his weight. He hadn't glanced behind him to see what was happening. Most people would be watching every movement, measuring every second. He did none of that. Instead, he looked straight ahead, calm, patient, almost respectful of the process. That calm made the officers uneasy. A senior officer stepped closer to the screen, lowering his voice. "Are we sure this is the right individual?" The younger officer swallowed. "Documents match. Face match. Everything matches." No one spoke for a moment. Procedures existed for situations like this, but they were rarely used. Almost never at a border checkpoint this quiet, this ordinary. One wrong move could escalate the situation unnecessarily. One wrong assumption could become a career-ending mistake. Outside, traffic was backing up. Drivers honked. A supervisor gestured to keep the line moving, unaware that something far more serious was unfolding just a few meters away. The senior officer exhaled slowly. "Bring him closer, but keep it professional." Two officers approached the man. Their tone remained calm, but their body language changed. They positioned themselves slightly apart, leaving space but controlling the area. It was subtle, something only trained eyes would notice. "Sir, we need to ask a few additional questions." "Of course," the man replied without hesitation. His voice was calm, not defensive, not annoyed. They asked about his travel purpose again, then about his previous stops, then about details that hadn't come up before. Each answer was precise. No contradictions, no nervous pauses, no unnecessary explanations. One officer tried a different approach. Is there anything we should know before we proceed further? The man met his eyes and held the gaze for a brief moment. No, he said simply. You're doing your job. That response unsettled them more than anger ever could have. Behind the scenes, another call was made, quiet, discreet. No sirens, no raised voices, just a short conversation, filled with coded language and careful wording. The reply came quickly. Do not escalate. Follow protocol. That single sentence changed the atmosphere completely. The officers returned to the man, now fully aware that this stop was no longer under their control. Yet the man remained composed, almost as if he had expected this exact turn of events. The power balance was shifting, but no one was ready to say it out loud. Not yet, because the truth they were circling around was bigger than any of them had imagined. And once it was spoken, there would be no turning back. The air at the checkpoint no longer felt neutral. It felt watched. The officers didn't say it out loud, but each of them sensed it. The subtle shift that happens when a situation moves beyond routine and into something far more serious. This was no longer just about documents or procedure. It was about control, and control was slipping. The senior officer adjusted his stance and took a measured step forward. Sir, he said carefully, for our records, can you confirm your full name once more? The man did not hesitate. He repeated it calmly, clearly, exactly as it appeared on the screen. That was the moment doubt officially turned into fear, because the name wasn't flagged for wrongdoing. It wasn't linked to any warning or alert in the way they expected. Instead, it carried a classification, one most officers only encountered during training simulations. A classification that came with instructions, not explanations. Restricted access, limited disclosure. Do not confront. One officer felt his pulse spike. Another glanced instinctively at the surrounding cameras. Every movement was being recorded now. Every word, every decision. Whatever happened next would be reviewed, replayed, and analyzed far beyond this checkpoint. The man stood silently, watching them, not with arrogance, but with awareness. He could feel the shift too. He knew the moment they crossed from suspicion into uncertainty. An officer tried to regain control of the situation by doing what he knew best, following protocol to the letter. Sir, we're going to need you to wait just a bit longer. Take your time, the man replied. There's no rush. That response landed heavier than intended. There was a rush. Traffic was backed up. Supervisors were watching. And now, somewhere far above them, someone else had been notified. Another call was made. This one was different. The officer lowered his voice, turned away slightly, and spoke in clipped, deliberate sentences. He used identifiers instead of names, codes instead of details. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When he ended the call, his expression had changed completely. Gone was the firmness. Gone was the authority. What remained was caution. He returned to the group and spoke quietly. We're proceeding differently. No one argued. Two officers subtly repositioned themselves, not to restrain the man, but to protect the space around him. The realization was sinking in. This wasn't someone they needed to control. It was someone they needed to not interfere with. The man finally broke the silence. You're doing fine, he said gently. I know this isn't an easy position to be in. That was when it became undeniable. This man understood their procedures better than they did. One officer swallowed hard. Sir, are you currently working under any federal authority? The question hovered in the air. The man paused, not because he was unsure, but because he was choosing his words carefully. I can't discuss details here, he said, but I can assure you this stop is being monitored. No threats, no arrogance, just a statement of fact. The officers exchanged looks. This was the line they weren't supposed to cross. The senior officer nodded slowly. Understood. For the first time since the stop began, the man's expression changed, not into a smile, but into something close to relief, as if he had been waiting for them to reach this point on their own. In the distance, a vehicle approached that hadn't been there before. Unmarked, quiet, intentional. The officers noticed it at the same time. So did the man. He straightened slightly, adjusting his jacket again, not nervously, but deliberately, like someone preparing for a conversation that mattered. The checkpoint fell silent. because whatever happened next would confirm what they all suspected. This was never just a routine stop, and the man standing in front of them was never just a traveler. The unmarked vehicle slowed as it approached the checkpoint. No flashing lights, no sirens, just a steady, deliberate roll forward, as if whoever was inside already knew exactly where to stop. The engine cut. The door didn't open right away. Every officer felt it, the invisible weight of presence, the kind that didn't need an announcement. The man at the center of it all didn't react outwardly, but something in his posture shifted. Not tension, readiness. The way someone stands when the next move matters. The senior officer glanced toward the vehicle, then back at the man. "Sir," he said quietly, "do you recognize that car?" The man's eyes followed the officer's gaze. He nodded once. Yes. That single word carried more authority than any badge in sight. The officers exchanged looks. No one reached for a weapon. No one raised their voice. Whatever this was, it demanded restraint, not force. The driver's door finally opened. A man stepped out, plain clothes, neutral expression, movements controlled and purposeful. He didn't rush. He didn't scan the area like someone searching for danger. He walked straight toward the checkpoint, as if the space already belonged to him. He stopped a few feet from the group. "I'll take it from here," he said calmly. No introduction. No credentials flashed. Yet the way he spoke wasn't a request. The senior officer hesitated just for a second, then nodded. Understood. That moment marked the shift. The plainclothes man turned to the traveler. "You okay?" The traveler met his eyes. "All good." There was something unspoken between them. Recognition, coordination, trust. The officers felt it instantly. This wasn't a rescue. This was a handoff. The plainclothes man glanced at the surrounding officers. "Thank you for following procedure. You did exactly what you were supposed to do." Relief washed over the checkpoint, but it was mixed with something else. Respect. One officer finally asked the question that had been burning in everyone's mind. "Sir, who is he?" The plainclothes man didn't answer immediately. He studied their faces, gauging what they already understood. "Let's just say," he replied carefully, "you weren't detaining him." The words landed softly, but the impact was enormous. The traveler stepped forward slightly, addressing the officers for the first time with something close to warmth. "I appreciate your professionalism," he said. "These situations aren't easy. No arrogance. No superiority, just acknowledgement." The senior officer cleared his throat. "Sir, are we clear to proceed?" The plainclothes man nodded. "Yes. Resume operations." And just like that, the checkpoint returned to motion. Traffic resumed. Radios crackled again. The world moved forward. But nothing felt the same. The plainclothes man leaned in toward the traveler, lowering his voice. "They didn't push it. That matters." The traveler nodded. They did their job. The two men turned away from the checkpoint, walking toward the unmarked vehicle. But before stepping inside, the traveler paused. He looked back at the officers one last time. "Sometimes," he said calmly, "the most important work happens when no one knows who you are." Then he got into the car. The door closed. The engine started, and the vehicle disappeared down the road, quietly, intentionally, leaving behind a group of officers who would never forget the day authority changed hands without a single command being spoken. They wouldn't talk about it publicly. They couldn't. But each of them knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had just crossed paths with someone operating in a world far beyond their own. And the truth they still didn't fully know was even bigger than they imagined. The unmarked vehicle didn't go far. It stopped just beyond the bend of the road, out of sight from the checkpoint, but close enough to stay connected to what had just happened. Inside the car, the silence felt different, no longer tense, but heavy with meaning. The traveler leaned back in his seat and exhaled slowly. "That was closer than expected," he said. The plainclothes man nodded, eyes still scanning the mirrors. "You handled it clean." They followed protocol. "That's why it worked," the traveler replied. "If they hadn't, this would have ended very differently." He reached into his jacket, not suddenly, not dramatically, and removed a slim, secured badge holder. Inside was a federal identification card, sealed and unmistakable. It wasn't shown often. It wasn't meant to be. The plainclothes man glanced at it briefly, then back at the road. "Words already moving," he said. "The system flagged your name exactly the way it was designed to." "That was the point," the traveler answered. "We needed to know who would react and how." Back at the checkpoint, confusion still lingered. The officers had resumed their duties, but their focus wasn't fully there. Routine questions felt hollow now. Every passing car reminded them of what had just slipped through their hands without resistance. One officer finally broke the silence. "That wasn't just some federal consultant," he said quietly. "No," the senior officer replied. "That was something else entirely." Inside the unmarked vehicle, the plainclothes man spoke again. "You sure you want this tied to you? Once the final report is filed, there's no pulling it back." The traveler didn't hesitate. "It needs to be," he said. "This operation only works if people don't realize who they're dealing with until it's too late." He paused, then added calmly, "That checkpoint was never the mission. It was the test." The plainclothes man looked over, surprised. "A test for what?" "For judgment," the traveler replied, "and restraint." A short silence followed. Then the plainclothes man said the words that confirmed everything. "Undercover status is officially logged. FBI task authority is active." The truth settled into the space between them. This wasn't a misunderstanding at a checkpoint. This was a controlled exposure. The traveler, known publicly to millions for discipline, fame, and precision, had been operating under a completely different identity. One built not on applause or recognition, but on anonymity and trust. His public image made him invisible in places where no one expected scrutiny. That invisibility was the advantage. Back at the checkpoint, a secure message arrived on the supervisor's device. It was brief, carefully worded. No further action required. Event cleared under federal oversight. No names, no explanations, just confirmation. The senior officer stared at the message for a long moment, then locked the screen. He didn't need details. He already knew enough. Meanwhile, the unmarked vehicle merged back into traffic. Another call came through, encrypted, short, direct. "We're green," a voice said. "Next phase proceeds as planned." The traveler straightened, the calm focus returning fully to his expression. "Then we move," he said. The plainclothes man smiled slightly. "You realize none of them will ever know the full story." "That's how it has to be," the traveler replied. "The work isn't about being known. It's about being effective." As the road stretched ahead, the reality became clear. The officers at that checkpoint believed they had simply let a powerful figure go. They had no idea they had stood face to face with an undercover FBI operative, one whose mission reached far beyond a border stop, far beyond authority they understood. And the operation that nearly revealed him? It was only just beginning. The checkpoint incident didn't make the news. It didn't appear in reports, headlines, or internal briefings shared with rank-and-file officers. On paper, it was logged as an uneventful stop. Routine, resolve closed. That was intentional. Some events were never meant to leave a trace. But silence didn't mean nothing happened. Inside secure offices far from the border, alerts were triggered. Analysts reviewed footage frame by frame. Behavioral experts noted reactions, timing, hesitation. Every decision made at that checkpoint became data. The operation had gained something valuable. Confirmation. In a quiet federal building, a small group gathered around a screen. No uniforms. No insignia on the walls. Just people who understood the cost of mistakes. One voice broke the silence. They followed protocol. Didn't escalate. Didn't push authority. Another nodded. Which means the system held. At least there. A third added. But if it hadn't, we'd be having a very different conversation. On the road, the unmarked vehicle continued forward, steady and unremarkable. The traveler stared out the window, watching the landscape pass. To anyone else, he looked like a man returning to ordinary life. He wasn't. "You okay?" the plainclothes man asked. The traveler nodded slowly. "I'm thinking about how close it was." "Close only matters if it fails," the other replied. "This didn't." "That's what worries me," the traveler said. "We can't rely on luck next time." They both understood what came next. The checkpoint had been a pressure point, designed to reveal reactions under uncertainty. And now that uncertainty was spreading. Somewhere, someone would notice patterns. Someone would ask questions. That was always the risk of working undercover. Back at the checkpoint, the officers tried to return to normal. But normal didn't fit anymore. Every calm traveler now seemed layered with possibility. Every routine question felt heavier. One officer finally said what everyone was thinking. If he hadn't stayed calm, this could have gone sideways. The senior officer nodded, which means we did our job right. Still, another added, I don't think I'll ever forget his eyes. He wasn't afraid. He was measuring us. That realization lingered. In the days that followed, subtle changes took place. Procedures were quietly reviewed. Training modules were updated. Small adjustments, barely noticeable, but intentional. The system had learned. So had the operation. In a secure briefing room, the traveler stood before a projection screen. He wasn't introduced by name. He didn't need to be. Everyone in the room already knew who he was, and who he wasn't supposed to be. Phase 1 exposed behavior under pressure, he said calmly. Phase 2 begins now. A map appeared on the screen. Lines, nodes, checkpoints. This isn't about enforcement, he continued. It's about trust. Who follows protocol? Who overreaches? Who panics when authority becomes unclear? Someone asked, and if they do, then we learn where the system bends, the traveler replied. Before it breaks. No one argued, because everyone understood what was at stake. Later that night, alone in a quiet room, the traveler finally allowed the weight of it all to settle. The double life, the constant restraint, the knowledge that one wrong reaction, from him or anyone else, could unravel everything. Publicly, he was admired, recognized, celebrated. Privately, he operated in shadows where recognition was a liability. He looked at his phone. No messages, no praise, no acknowledgement. That was the point. The operation moved forward not with noise, but with precision. And somewhere beyond the safety of controlled tests and calm checkpoints, forces were already shifting. People were reacting. Patterns were changing. The border stop had been a warning. The next phase? That would be a confrontation. And this time, there would be no routine to hide behind. The operation ended the same way it began. Quietly. No press conferences. No announcements. No official acknowledgement that it had ever existed. Files were closed, systems updated, and conversations that mattered were never recorded where they could be found again. From the outside, nothing had changed. But for the people who had been part of it, even unknowingly, everything was different. At the border checkpoint, weeks passed. Traffic flowed. Routines returned. Yet something invisible remained in the air. Officers moved with sharper awareness now. Questions were asked more carefully. Authority was exercised with restraint, not assumption. The senior officer stood one morning watching vehicles pass and finally understood what had bothered him most that day. It wasn't the uncertainty. It was the realization that power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits to see who respects the process. In a secure office far away, the final report was reviewed. No names were attached. No faces shown. Just conclusions. Protocol adherence. Successful. Escalation avoidance. Critical. Judgment under pressure. Validated. The traveler read the summary silently, then closed the file. That's enough, he said. Someone asked, do you want credit log internally? He shook his head. No. The lesson matters more than the recognition. Because recognition was never the goal. The real success was knowing that when uncertainty entered the system, professionalism had held the line. Later, alone, he reflected on how close it had come to going wrong. A raised voice, a careless assumption, a single decision made too quickly. Any of it could have turned a controlled test into a failure with real consequences. Yet it hadn't. Not because of authority, but because of restraint. The checkpoint officers would never know his full role. They would never hear the words undercover or federal operations spoken aloud in relation to that day. And that was intentional. Their reward wasn't knowledge. It was trust. Trust that they had done their job right when it mattered most. As for the traveler, he returned to his public life seamlessly. Cameras flashed. Crowds cheered. Applause followed him wherever he went. To the world, he was exactly who they expected him to be. But now, he carried something else with him. A reminder that the most dangerous moments aren't always loud. They're quiet. They happen when assumptions replace judgment, when power is mistaken for control, when someone believes they understand a situation without truly seeing it. The border checkpoint had been a test, not of authority, but of character. And character had passed. The traveler looked out at the world moving freely, unaware of how close it had come to learning a secret it didn't need to know. Some truths, he understood, were better left unseen, because the strength of a system isn't proven by how aggressively it acts, but by how wisely it chooses not to. And that lesson, unspoken, undocumented, unforgettable, would quietly protect more people than anyone would ever realize.